Good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome to the investment meeting, the Teachers Retirement System, on May 6th, 2019. Patricia, would you please call the roll?
John Adler.
Here.
Thomas Brown.
Present.
Natalie Green-Giles. Here. David Kazansky.
Present.
Lindsay Oates. Deborah Penny.
Present.
Susanna Vickers.
Here.
You do have a quorum.
Thank you. Turn it over to Will Time for the performance report.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
So I'll, as a quick reminder, March was the third month in a row in which we saw positive returns in U.S. equity markets. And for the U.S., that meant positive returns of about 1.5%. Abroad, we also saw positive returns, though a little bit more mixed, with non-U.S. equity markets up about 60 basis points. So what really drove results, at least for the Diversified Equity Fund during March, was what we saw in the U.S. The Diversified Equity Fund was up about 1% for the month. That brought the calendar year-to-date return to about 12.7%, compared to the broad U.S., which was up about 14%. A little bit of lagging there, again, really driven by the allocations to non-U.S. And then with respect to the hybrid benchmark, that benchmark was up about 1.3% for the month of March, and that proxy is roughly in line with the Diversified Equity Fund year-to-date, up about 12.9%. The relative results for March were impacted largely by the allocation to actively managed strategies, which unfortunately lagged during the month of March. Year-to-date, however, that composite's up about 13%, which is a little behind, or I should say behind by about 1% of the broad U.S. equity market. Non-U.S. equity strategies have fared better on a relative basis. Year-to-date up about 10%, about 25 basis points ahead of the international benchmark. The balanced fund at the end of March had about $400 million in assets. That fund was up about 1% during the month. Calendar year to date, that fund is up about 4.5%. The International Equity Fund, I noted earlier some relative outperformance by that fund. Here you can see that fund was up about 75 basis points for the month of March and just shy of 10% year to date. The Inflation Protection Fund, with assets of about $70 million, that fund was up about 85 basis points, and calendar year to date up about 6.3%. And the Socially Responsive Equity Fund, with assets of about $221 million, that fund was up about 0.5% for March, lagging the S&P, which was up about 2%. Calendar year to date, that fund is up 11.5%.
Any questions about the March report?
So,
yeah.
We'll go into April. April was another strong month for equity markets. The U.S. equity market was up about 4%. You can see the Russell 3000 there. Calendar year to date, that benchmark is up just about 18.5%, so really strong. And that brought the fiscal year to date results to 8.9%. So we've really wiped away, or eliminated, if you will, the impact of the fourth quarter when you look back over that time period. Outside the U.S., the International Composite Benchmark, also a strong month, but still behind the U.S., up about 2.8%. Calendar year to date, non-U.S. markets up about 12.8%, and roughly flat for the fiscal year to date. The Diversified Equity Fund's hybrid benchmark, that was up about 3.7%, with a calendar year-to-date return of about 17%. Within the international equity markets, if you go about halfway down the page, you can see the developed non-U.S. markets measured by the EFI index. That was up about 3%. Calendar year-to-date up about 13%. And then the custom emerging markets benchmark, also positive, a little bit less so non-U.S. developed markets, but still up about 2% with a calendar year-to-date return of 8%. Below that, there's the underlying strategies for the Inflation Protection Fund and the Socially Responsive Fund. During April, they both posted positive returns, with the underlying strategy for the Socially Responsive Fund up about 3%, with a calendar year-to-date return of about 15%.
questions for Mike on April? So I think the next item is the discussion of the investment policy statement, and who's going to be that? Robin?
I can make some comments. Again, this is very much a joint effort with lots of participants, and particularly Diane Randall at the Controller's Office, doing a lot of work. So what we've distributed in advance are lots of documents. We have some paper copies of the red line version. I'm happy to walk through the document. I will say that what has been changed is really primarily moving sections around to facilitate the flow. I don't think, and I ask Valerie or anyone else if you disagree, I don't think there have been substantive changes. We've continued to focus on a very user-friendly document that has good flow with a series of exhibits that contain detail that was previously largely contained in the body of the document. So again, the guiding principle in editing this document has not been to make rule changes or policy changes, but rather to take out the detail that is subject to periodic review and change, such as the divestment policy, the exclusion list, those kinds of things, and the asset allocation targets, and to move them into appendices that can be readily changed without changing the body of the document. There are still, I noticed in here some minor typos that need to be addressed, but other than that, I think and I will also say there's an appendix that summarizes the main changes from the former document to this document that will be added. But those changes will really fall into the category of removing detail and placing it into an appendix.
And I would just mention that, you'll see some red line that's green line in the document. And some of that is just moving paragraphs from one place to another without real wording changes. We just went over it and just tried to make the flow a little bit more logical and make sense.
Discussion, questions? I just have a couple of questions. So, I've gone over this document, I think it looks good. I have not yet gone over the appendices, and is the idea that we're going to adopt the appendices when we adopt the full IPS?
I believe so.
Okay.
Yeah. And
So-
the appendices should have been circulated
Yeah,
along with the draft. Yeah.
There are a lot of them. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, some of them are, well, you can take a look.
Okay. And my other question is it correct to say that there really are no substantive changes in this document? And where did we end up landing somewhere on the issue of the limits?
No, we kept them unchanged and
So just
flagged it
those who
as a
are not-
topic that needed to come back to the board for any rule
Okay.
change.
And my understanding is that BAM is working with Roboton to kind of come up with an analysis, and will make a recommendation soon.
Well, it's not so much with us because it's in the private market, so I think they're working with the private market consultants.
Oh, okay, sorry. With Hamilton Lane, to try to come up with some kind of analysis, and then we'll present that and the rationale for a recommended change to those allocations. But all of that hasn't been finalized, so I think that
Just to
we
be
had
clear,
to put
what
the
we're
whole
talking
ranges
about,
in here.
what we're talking about for those not.
What's that? Was it the rebalancing ranges?
No, it's not. It's the maximum amount that can be
Exposure.
allocated
Oh, yes, yes,
to
yes.
any specific manager in the different private asset classes. And it varies by asset class
And
right
it's
now.
also to a specific fund.
Is it just, it's to a fund and to a manager?
Yeah, there are
Okay,
two different
thank you.
things.
To a fund and to a manager. So I think it's actually been discussed probably with Hamilton Lane and Stepstone, because we have Stepstone for real estate and infrastructure.
Right.
Right. And probably, are you guys on in, is it true also for OFI? You're not in discussion about OFI?
No, I don't believe it's.
I think OFI didn't currently have the limitations in their asset section of the IPS.
It doesn't refer to OFI.
Right.
And can I ask this question, and obviously we do have to review, but are there any other substantive changes in the appendices?
But we were very careful not to make any substantive changes that reflect any decisions the board has made. What we really tried to remove are redundancies throughout the documents, and then again to extract detail to the appendix. The details are really important, but they get lost in the main document. We tried to have the main document be able to stand alone on its own with reference to appendices for detail regarding specific policies.
And I would say that maybe, there's an approved asset class and an asset allocation section that has things like the rebalancing ranges that were adopted during the last asset allocation. It's possible that document was not consistent with some of the things in the previous IPS that were just old and had been there for a couple of years. So, it's not new policy because it's our most recent approved selections, but it might have changed or, overrode things that were in the previous draft.
But I think that's because things that were in the previous draft should have been eliminated and changed.
Right.
Yeah, it should have been updated.
It no longer reflected the board's
Right.
Decisions.
Right.
Policies.
But I'm just saying that it could be, if you're asking for any changes, that could be the case.
I have a question in the appendices. Is it a typo, or is there some difference between Appendix 4 and Appendix... Oh, I see. Appendix
think
12 was
the-
listed restriction
yeah,
on miscellaneous.
It seems like the numbering is all messed up for the appendices.
Yeah.
Correct. There is no appendix 72 or 100.
We tried. We gave up after 15.
That's what I was referring to. There's still some typos. So I think they're in the right order, but somehow there should have been a strike through one of the numbers. So instead of Appendix 98, it should have been
It's kind of like the
Appendix 98.
date on the front page. It says
Yes.
May, February.
Yes,
It's the,
some of the
I assume it was just
strike-throughs.
the
Yeah.
Yes,
Right.
yes.
Okay.
Looks like my television remote, where you're on channel 4, the up button, and it goes to channel 170. And just one thing to notify the board on, and someone's going to remind me, maybe Valerie or well, Suzanne. There was an appendix, so there's some related appendices, and I think that we ended up eliminating one, if I'm not mistaken. So there's, I'm looking at page 3, the list of appendices. So there's divestment policy, and that's the divestment policy that the board adopted. There's the excluded companies list, which is the list of companies that are currently excluded, subject to the divestments that we have adopted. And then there's, wasn't there one other, restrictions on permissible investments. So what's that?
I think it would be helpful, maybe we can all turn to where those appendices are
That's the World
referenced.
Bank list, right? For private markets.
Where the appendices are mentioned
Mike
in
can
the,
pull it up in his computer.
in the actual document, because then that gives the context to what we're talking about.
And
So
it should be on about page 19, eligible investments and policy restrictions.
yes, I remember spending a lot of time on page 19. Maybe we start.
See, yeah, it's third line from the bottom. board may also establish restrictions on permissible market sectors or companies. See Appendix 4. Yeah, there are.
But the question there,
Yeah, this doesn't read correctly. This is, and I think some of it is that the red line is not showing up the way it should.
There's no strikeout in this at all.
Yeah, and there should be some strikeout.
We got a word.
Valerie, can I ask you a question?
Me?
Well, it just seems like there's a lot of work to get this to be a clean document.
I think what happened is, so Diana, the controller's office circulated a draft that had the red line and it was correct. And then somehow in the transmission to Rokaton, things got a little confused.
In the version that was distributed electronically before the meeting, it actually is correct. So I think it's just a printer.
Is it a
It's
printer
literally
thing?
a printer.
It must be.
Yeah, because we looked at the
You have it
document,
up
it
on-
showed the
I'm
red
jumping
line
on
and they
page
were
which page
correct.
are we
page 19, it's the bottom bullet on our version, because we did do work on this paragraph in it.
Do you want us to try to get it up on the screen?
That be forwarded and made copies of now? Could you forward it to a secretary?
Well, it sounds like-
That's right.
Yeah.
The pages are not
We
aligned.
could move on to another.
So I'm trying to find it
Liz,
on, you know,
I can put it up on the
It's
It's
screen.
under section.
Do you want to pull it up on the
section
screen?
four.
Yeah, we're gonna put it up on the,
We'll put it up on the screen.
we're gonna put the document up on the screen.
So we have an HDMI cable.
I'm sorry.
I can plug it in here if someone wants.
Well, let's see what I think,
Because I remember we did talk about this.
Right, if there are changes in the bullet, you can see it right here on the screen.
But it,
no,
you should go to page 19.
It's page 17 in the red
Is
line.
it 17 in the red line?
On the red line, it's page 17.
Go
on
to
the paper,
section
it's page
4, eligible investment and
Right.
policy restrictions.
Right, I have it here. You can see it on the screen. You can see the deletions. They do exist. But wait, I do have it. Do you, what do you, what do you have? What type of?
He's getting me a USB converter.
Oh, I have an I could,
You have
I could
HDMI?
project direct off of HDMI on mine if you want.
Mike, we'll just connect it to David's laptop.
Where's the plug? Right there. On the left.
Yes, it's totally different.
okay, it's on the board.
At the risk of prolonging things, do you want to just flip through very quickly or not?
Of the entire document?
Of just the body of the document?
We could. Yeah.
There's very little actually.
Okay.
Mike, could you go to the first slide and let's flip through and point out? Thank you. Okay. All right. Okay, so this is just, we separate out public and private. Okay. Go on. Okay, keep going. here are all the appendices. And there's a divestment policy appendix, which is 3, and restrictions on permissible investments, which is 4. So you'll see that excluded companies list comes out, and it's replaced with the list of restrictions. Okay? And the rest is just moving things around, so because it's referred to later in the document. Okay? So nothing significant here.
Are you going through the whole document?
Very quickly.
Okay.
There's not a lot.
Yeah. Just to make sure we don't overlook anything. So this purpose was moved from elsewhere in the document up to the front. So here's where it was. It didn't. Thought it should be at the beginning of the document. So these are just really wordsmithing, nothing meaningful. So we added here that one of the board's responsibilities is to approve not only the asset allocation strategy, but the annual implementation plan. And this was added, go back up a little bit. So this is just go up a little bit so we can see what this section is. So this is what the staff does.
The role of the controller.
This is the role of the controller, and we talk here about the fact that they're managing the program allocations for the annual implementation plan that you've approved. Okay.
That term, program allocation, I mean, now that you're raising it, what does that mean? Program allocation.
It's the investment program.
Sorry, the investment what?
Program. The investment structure allocation. So it's not just asset allocations. It's including everything, whether they're specific sectors, whether they're countries. So it's not just by asset class.
And sub-asset classes, like all the sub-asset classes would be like the fixed income program.
Is that defined somewhere in the document? I mean, it's just kind of a program allocation. That's a term I don't remember seeing the definition of.
I'm sure it is not.
Right. It's probably referring to the annual implementation plan, which
But that's
can
an
be
annual
detailed.
implementation plan. But anyway, it seems weird to.
We could take out the word program if you like. Approved allocations.
Because it is per the latest annual implementation plan, so it's referring back to the annual implementation.
That's fine. I just think when you put it, it's the fact that I didn't know what it meant. I'm not saying I know what everything means, but
You could delete the word program.
yeah, maybe we should delete the word
Okay, we'll delete the word program.
Is someone making a note of that?
Yes.
Okay. Then I will do it here and save it. Okay.
Okay, that's on page 12. Okay. So the controller's office is responsible for rebalancing and monitoring performance. And so we had this language and it had been moved. So this managing program allocations, it's not new language so much. Okay. All right, let's keep going.
Wait. It's in there twice now?
No, it had been there. We moved it up.
Right.
Yeah.
It just looks like
In your
on our document.
in your paper copy,
Green.
strike-throughs didn't get done, deletions, so
Okay.
that's why.
Right.
That's why we're doing it this way.
Okay, thanks. Sorry.
Yeah, it's confusing if you look at the paper because I
Yeah.
think maybe the track changes weren't accepted before it was printed.
Okay. All right, so this goes through the role of the executive director, the actuary, general consultant.
Just one other question.
Yes.
I don't know that there's an appendix it properly belongs in, but we've said that we're trying to make the body of the document not reflect changes that happen periodically. This says under the actuary that the AIR is currently set at 7% per annum. That is subject to change. Would we want to put that, could it belong somewhere in an appendix so it doesn't get changed in the body of the document when and if it gets changed?
You could actually eliminate it completely since it's codified in the administrative code.
And also by saying which is currently set, doesn't mean you have to update it. It just as of the date of filings.
I know that's true of full documentation. I mean,
Right.
it really does undermine the intent here. So maybe we should just eliminate it from the document.
You could say the actuary periodically recommends to the board an error assumption.
Period.
Net of expenses.
Yeah.
Period. Or period.
Yeah, the ARR assumption is ultimately
Is
codified.
ultimately codified in the administrative.
That's the other
just
place
take
we
it
could
out.
put it. We could put it in, who knows what number it is, but the appendix on the asset allocation, if the asset allocation is somewhat pegged to
But
pegged to the AIR. What's that?
currently it's at 6.9, so maybe we just take it out. Do you
Let's take it
like-
out for that.
I would take it out.
Okay, done. Okay.
Every time you read it, you see something else.
Yes, that's an issue.
It is a problem.
That's why David did it.
So this is some language changes we discussed about private market investment managers and their responsibilities. So you can see very really little changes.
Yeah, so this is probably the
Okay.
section that we want to go
Yes.
through.
Okay.
So we changed the title from just eligible investments to eligible investments and policy restrictions to bake in the restrictions and not have them in a separate section.
So we took, come back here to the top. So we took out that awards investment management contracts. And can someone remind me why we did that?
Because
I think it's
I say
covered
it
in the
doesn't,
board's
yeah,
law.
I don't think it
Okay.
needs to be there, and it should be covered in the
Rural board. Thank you. So this is the paragraph that we're talking about.
It just feels like. So I think it's worth noting here, there's a policy, which is one appendix, and then there's a list of excluded market sectors or companies, which is a result of that policy, that's in a second appendix. So the policy is appendix 3, the list that results from the implementation of that policy is appendix 4.
But I just want to say, so the policy may result in the exclusion of specific securities or sectors from the universe of eligible investments. The board may also establish restrictions on permissible market sectors or companies. I'm just trying to understand the distinction here. So we have, in the second one, permissible market sectors or companies. In the first one, we have securities or sectors, but not markets.
Can I
Yes.
remind you that the divestment policy isn't specific to any particular securities? It's a document that lays out the board's process in thinking about divestments and exclusions. So it's just a process document. It's
So
the
then
board's
that first sentence
policy.
is incorrect. The
No.
policy doesn't result in
May
exclusion.
result in the exclusion of specific securities or sectors.
Yeah, we have a divestment policy.
And the policy specifies that whatever is excluded, so into the policy, it is on a list. So the divestment policy does reference a list of divestments.
Actually, so that's not, I don't think you're right. The policy doesn't say anything. The policy says, this is how we go about it. It's a process as a result of the policy.
But the policy does
Establishes a process,
establishes
doesn't
a monitoring process. And part of that monitoring process is that there is a list of any company or sector that is subject to a divestment or exclusion based on decisions of the board following the policy. So it does reference a list of, and it would list any companies that are excluded pursuant to the divestment.
You can pull up the appendix if you'd like.
I mean, I think I think John is making a very, very fine point. I think, like if that sentence said something like, the board has a divestment policy, and exercise of this policy may result in the exclusion of blah, blah, blah. Is that what you're trying to
The
make
policy
clear?
doesn't say anything about specific securities. It doesn't.
It doesn't say anything about specific securities,
But if
it
you-
does.
but if
They result in the exclusion of those securities
But
too,
you,
if you
right,
follow the
by
policy.
following the policy or implementing the
You
policy.
have a list of excluded securities.
So we could say
That's-
implementation of the board's policy may result.
Sure.
I mean, I'm just saying, it's a confusing, when you take everything out of this, and you just have these two sentences, it's a little confusing. And
So
also,
how-
it's a little confusing to me why we say securities and sectors in the first sentence, and we say markets, sectors, or companies. Why would we say, first of all, why would we say companies in the second sentence and securities in the first one? Why not be consistent? And
Because
secondly, markets wouldn't markets be also result from the implementation of the divestment exclusion policy? No, I'm asking a question.
I mean, I think we were
No.
thinking that
Permissible markets, meaning, permissible markets in that second sentence, I think is really those are the countries that, that's referring to countries.
Two different country schemes
Right,
that we have.
as opposed to
Or our current
sector,
country
which
screen.
is gun manufacturers, for example.
I think we're trying to cover all of the, the ways that the board has thought about this, past and is currently thinking about it. So the divestment policy, exercise or use of the divestment policy did not lead to the permissible country list that we have now.
Okay.
Yeah, that's
But
the
exercise of
distinction
that policy,
of the divestment policy.
of the divestment and exclusion policy,
Correct.
is what results in securities or sectors being
Correct.
excluded.
So do you
that
want to
sounds
change
like-
that second
it
sentence?
sounds-
It results in results in a divestment.
Like thermal
and
coal.
Future
Right.
exclusion.
So it seems to me that we shouldn't list these things twice. So it said the divestment exclusion policy is what results in exclusion of securities or sectors.
Yeah, but
And then we also establish restrictions on permissible markets. Because you're
Correct.
saying the policy doesn't address markets. But one way or another, the policy is what addresses securities and sectors. I
Right,
think.
and that's what this says, isn't it?
No, it says two different things.
no, well, there's whatever comes from a divestment initiative from the board. Right now, the board has also established, and it was outside of divestment, restrictions on permissible markets. And a good example in the private market side is there, and it's called the permissible market list, which is why that term
Right.
is used. And that wasn't a divestment
I
initiative.
understand that.
Right,
So
but then, John,
I'm
the
saying the
difference
second
is-
sentence, the first sentence addresses sectors
No, but it also, but I think we're missing the point. It also refers to divestment, stuff that we own, that we choose not to own, and we want to get out of. We're divesting from those securities.
That's the policy.
Exactly, and that's what it says.
So is
and
your-
then we also have the option, and we're looking at restricting certain.
It's the second sentence.
Exactly.
But,
So it's
but the second sentence.
it's all very clear the way it's written.
I don't
What,
think
what, John, can you specifically say
Yes,
what
I'll
is
say
not?
what I mean. Let me
Yes,
specifically
thank
say.
you.
When we exclude specific securities or sectors, and I would take securities as a broader way of saying companies, because companies issue securities. Okay? So the company securities are the same thing. So let's just take the term securities. That results from the implementation of the board's policy.
The divestment policy.
The first sentence.
Yes.
So I would say the only problem I have with the first sentence is it should say implementation, and then I think it's fine.
Okay.
And then I think the second sentence should simply say the board may also establish restrictions on permissible markets.
I think that works.
Okay, because we don't want to add sectors or companies because that is done.
No, because that's what we're doing right now with our country screen replacement. Is we might be can I say that?
I have a promotion. I have a suggestion. Can we just add the establish additional restrictions? That way, to the extent there's any overlap, put in the word additional. If you think there's overlap between the two, you preserve the language Suzanne is talking about, and at the same time you say, here's our core, but we can also establish additional restrictions.
Right, because we're talking right now with our replacement for the country screen of having a screen against specific companies, and that's what we're referring to here.
But I think what our counsel has advised us is that that should be
That's
pursuant to
probably
the
going to be
divestment exclusion policy.
depending, yeah. So I would think that the board may also establish additional restrictions. Okay. Do you want to say,
Additional
such as on permissible markets?
Right. Can I make a suggestion?
Additional investment restrictions.
That may work, or we can kind of have a subgroup that works on the wordsmithing of this and then sends it back around to everybody.
Sure.
Sure.
Why not kick it back to the existing subgroup? Sure.
But maybe with a goal of like this week, coming up with that language and recirculating the draft to everybody.
Okay.
Sure.
Okay.
Board meeting,
And then
we're still on track for that.
Yeah, and I think
That's
that
why she wants to do it this week. So.
yeah,
Okay,
the goal
then I
would
just
be
wanna,
adoption of the IPS.
Susie,
as-
resident
as-
writer, needs to
as
know
soon
what
as-
Susie does writer needs to write.
as soon as practicable.
okay.
So, may I
At the
make a
appropriate-
suggestion in tandem with that? That I know, John, you had said that you haven't gone through all of the appendices. Let's make sure we get that done,
Yes.
so that any issues can be addressed, so we can put this baby to bed at the board meeting.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, and if anybody has any technology issues, formatting issues, tracking issues, that's understandable, and feel free to come back to me. I think I have the original stuff, and I can have it resent to you if you need it.
Is there anything else? Okay, is there anything else substantive in here? Keep going, Mike, please. Get it all done?
Go back to that fine page. Thank you.
Nice try.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. I just wanted to make sure I see what's we're dealing with. Okay. Thank you.
These changes are just moving language around to flow better. So we had something, this opt-out rights, so this excluded companies is what we're, list is what we're addressing. And on page 19. So here's where, for the first time, we include language around the BAM's investment committee. Because we felt that this was not included in the originally approved language document, but this investment committee was established.
What page is this?
25.
25 was established in recent years. You may recall this discussion. Don, I'm going to
I do remember this.
Yeah,
This
so
is, I think, important to point out to the board because it is a change.
Yes, that's what I agree. So, it's not a change in process. This is what happens today. But what we're by including mention of the investment committee, we're saying that this is a relatively permanent change to the process. The addition of a formally designed investment committee within BAM to review manager recommendations. And we decided it was not dependent on the tenure of any one chief investment officer. Okay, so we can keep going. Just reference, yeah. I think this was discussed elsewhere. We moved this concept
Right, it was redundant.
earlier.
That
Yeah.
was-
That's really it. So we've agreed to change a couple of things. We're going to go back and work on this language on page 19, and then forward everything for approval at the upcoming public board meeting. Is that the plan?
Yes, I
Okay.
think we would recirculate this document with these changes, and we can highlight that paragraph and any additional tweaking we do to that paragraph. The appendices don't have any track changes in it. This is a pretty easier documents to record.
And they don't track changes because there haven't been changes made.
Very
Well, a lot of them were created,
or created.
Yes, the
There's-
business.
so they're not.
They were made by extracting language
Yes.
from the document itself.
But the ones that did exist before, they have not been changed.
None of them have been changed.
Okay. I had the impression that the asset class heads were reviewing them, but I am.
The asset class
That's a new
sections.
section.
Yeah, the
That's
asset
a
class
new
sections were created.
The
I
approved
think-
asset classes.
Appendix here it says 15. No, sorry, 72. They just made short.
Okay. Any other questions on investment policy? All right. I believe that concludes the business for the public agenda today. Is there a motion to move into executive session?
There is. I move pursuant to Public Offices Law, Section 105, to go into executive session for discussions on specific investment matters.
Second?
Thank you. Any discussion? All in favor of the motion to exit public session and enter executive session, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, please say nay. Any abstentions? Motion carries. We are back in public session. Susie, would you please report out of the executive session?
Certainly. In executive session, consensus was reached to renew various investment manager contracts. We held a discussion of a specific term to be used in a specific investment. there was a discussion about different ways and approaches to implement our investment belief statement.
Great, thanks so much. I believe that concludes our business for today. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? All in favor of the motion to adjourn, please say aye. Aye. All opposed, please say nay. Any abstentions? Motion carries. The meeting is adjourned.
All right, we gotta go.